everybody. Hello, good day. Welcome to my live stream today. Let's make sure. Yep, good. We got sound, we got video. Hi, everybody. We are going to have a little chat today. Welcome to my channel. Thank you for joining us for this live stream. And as you can see, I am joined by Christian Szurko. And he is this wonderful person who is probably one of the nicest men I know. And he has been, as if you've seen earlier episodes that we have done in earlier live streams, got some data on my phone. Okay, that's interesting. I'm just sorry, I got distracted by the comments there. So everybody. Anyway, Christian has joined me for a number of talks about the subject of recovering from a destructive cult or a high authority group or an authoritarian situation or a narcissistic relationship. There's so many ways we describe this, but basically these little abusive relationships or situations that we get ourselves into that tend to be fairly life-shaking and life-changing and sometimes life-altering in fairly significant ways. So, Christian, thanks for joining me for this live stream.
Pleasure as always, Chris.
Good times. I think we've had some pretty interesting talks about cult recovery and about getting back to normal. And I think this time we're gonna sort of cap this with something that doesn't really get talked about a lot in the recovery discussions. I've been to ICSA conferences, International Cultic Studies Association conferences, and I've talked with professionals and I've read literature and I've read books and talked with other cult survivors about this. And it seems that there's kind of a sort of stigma that can develop in regards to being a cult survivor. Have you seen this with people you have worked with over the years or heard about this or have any idea what I'm talking about?
In all sorts of ways, actually. It's a really big subject. You've made it sound so simple and straightforward.
I know, right?
It really isn't.
I know.
Well, on the positive side, there are a number of us who are doing this work because of our own experiences. We've been through the grinder, we've come out the other end, and somehow we've survived it. Somehow we have turned it into a positive, and here we are doing whatever it is we're doing. Other people have gone through it; they've recovered as well, but instead of coming into the work, they've gone and they found something else to do with their lives. They're happy, they're productive, they are, they are as healed from that experience as is possible to be, given that it's a very deeply and troublingly wounding experience for some people. But other people get stuck, and it's as if their identity used to be as a member of the group, and now their identity is as an ex-member of the group.
That's right.
And they never grow beyond that to say, who am I, besides having been in and besides having come out? And so they do get stuck. Some of those people, and not so much now, because now there is more emphasis on recovery, but some of those people back in the olden days found themselves being pulled in, and instead of being directed towards help and recovery, they were pulled straight into, well, why don't you do some work for me? You can start out by doing some filing, and then as you get to know more, you can get stuck in. And I've seen this happen, and it's usually ended badly for the people that happened to. I've even seen people who have gone on to become experts in some small way. And I don't know, maybe not a small way, but in some way they've become experts, but they've never learned more than what they knew in the days and weeks and months of initially emerging from their own group. And what they've then done is to project their little experience out onto the big wide world, as if that's what all extremist groups are like and all extremist relationships are like.
That's right.
And when that happens, I think it's detrimental to the entire work that we're trying to do here.
I agree with you.
You've actually raised a very huge topic. It's like you've pulled a whale out of the water by just grabbing its fin and showing it to me and saying, "Have you ever seen a fin like this before?"
Yes. Well, it is a big topic because it's, because we're talking about goals, we're talking about, getting on with the rest of your life, following a cultic experience or a narcissistic relationship, or, coming out of these situations. We found, going all the way back to Lifton, that communist propaganda and indoctrination of the kind laid in these communist re-education camps post,
Mhm.
communist revolution, where physical torture or physical, working the person over,
Yeah.
denying them food, denying them sleep. Um, it wasn't full on POW situations, although Lifton's work also applies to that. You have, oh, hey, thanks, Teresa. Thank you very much for that super chat. You have this, laid in what they called or referred to and were terrified of in the 50s, this idea of brainwashing, this idea that you have had ideas laid into you that are not of your own creation, that you did not particularly even ask for. You bought into a certain level of a belief set, and then they just kind of kept piling it on. And, there was this idea in the 50s and 60s that this was, this could be a permanent thing, this whole Manchurian candidate idea that, that these ideas were dangerous and were laid in a level that you can't really fully grasp or root out of yourself. And I think I bring
Hmm.
that up because I think those are the roots of some of the thinking we still see today, where these, you have this
Yeah.
experience, and it is such a totalist experience because it's so
Sure.
consuming that after you get out of it, it's very easy to define yourself, your personality, and your life just by this experience. I mean, me,
Hmm.
27 years in Scientology, that's not a small amount of time.
Mhm.
I could easily spend the next 27 years of my life, and I have spent the last 7 years breaking all this stuff down, talking about it, thinking about it, talking to other people about it, really going on a roll. Wrote a book about it, I mean, there's a lot to talk about here. Yet I find myself craving a freedom from this. At this point, I find myself seeking, I think I kind of got over most of this at this point. you know? And I know, and I don't want to project myself onto everybody else out there and say, well, just because this happened to me, this is how everybody else has to go. But I
Hmm.
think that there can be a little bit of a danger in staying in this mindset or staying in this place where I have to define myself this way. And I speak about this in terms of me, so hopefully other people can relate to the experience I'm talking about here. What do you think?
Well, I can see and have seen all different sides of this situation. The truth is that if you go back to the 70s and 80s, if there weren't ex-members involved in this work, very little of this work would have gotten done by comparison.
True.
It's not that nothing would have been done, because there were still the parents of members and ex-members who were very active. In the 1970s, so much of the impetus for our work came from parent support groups and family support groups,
Hmm.
and they would have still been there. But I guess what I'm saying is that I see that some people were harmed by having to put aside their own personal recovery for the sake of being busy and
Mm.
looking after other people, or trying to reach other people, or helping somebody else who was already working. It and I found that disturbing when I would see, in some cases, quite dramatic examples of someone who had come out of, oh, I don't know, the Unification Church, for example, and they were disturbed by their experiences. They'd had some really bad experiences. They came out, and instead of being given that space to reevaluate what was happening to them and to get help with recovery, they were just pulled in and employed as an assistant to someone else.
Well, it's not even that hard to do because you often find
That didn't
people.
go well.
Well, yeah, because in these situations, you have people who have joined groups. Now, obviously, Scientology is kind of out there a bit in terms of the whole save the world thing, but a lot of these groups have that purpose or
Hmm.
that impetus or this belief set that you are going to significantly contribute to the world and the benefit and health and well-being of other people through your
Sure.
sacrifices, through your hard work, through your martyrdom even.
Yeah.
That is certainly culturally there within the world of Scientology, and I've seen that in other groups too, especially the religious
Yes.
groups. Although we do get this also even in business cults and stuff. You get this, we're
Yeah.
making the big changes. And I only comment on that because I think that that headspace stays with you after you leave, and it makes it more difficult. I wanted to keep saving the world, after I got out of
Yeah.
Scientology. That wasn't an on-off switch. Took me years to get my head around that, and the negative um, consequences or of being in that headspace, because you will sacrifice yourself. You will make decisions that are not in your best interest because you're still operating in some of that cult dogma, even though you are even though you're sitting there ragging on the cult all the time, right? L. Ron Hubbard's such a bad guy, but I still have to make all these sacrifices.
Yeah.
So there's
Exactly.
this sort of onion layer, the onion skin process of peeling the layers off as you get out,
Sure.
and I think some of the cult thought processes and thought stopping cliches and ideas and goals can kind of get in the way of that a little bit, to what you were just speaking to.
Yeah. It's a, and I think this is what happened in the case that I just referred to, but I've seen it happen in other cases where, um, where, as you say, it's quite common for people to come out of their group, but the group isn't really out of them in some sense.
That's right. That's right.
Um, there's a certain cigarette commercial that I remember from back in the day that you could take the cigarette out of the country, but you couldn't take the country out of the cigarette. I'm not doing a cigarette advertisement, so I'm not
Sure.
naming them, but I think you know the commercial. Um, this idea that you leave the group, and as you say, you're still trying to clear the planet, save the world, etc., etc. Um, Other people have that same sense, and there's also the consideration that people are changed by the recruitment process and by the
Mm,
training process, whatever group they're in. And that process is sufficiently effective that they have a clear idea of the fact that they're special people with a special purpose.
mm,
Now you come out. What is your specialness? Where is your specialness? Where is your special purpose? Who are you now?
that's
You're
right.
no longer carrying out that mission or that whatever it is, that purpose. And when, if somebody comes along and says, well, you can help us fight your group, you can help us fight these other groups that are doing the same thing, that's so much like a purpose to save the world. And it's not that I'm against that, it's that I have seen it abused so that the person doesn't go through the stripping away, as you say, of peeling the onion, stripping away the cognitive dysfunction, the distortion of thought processes, the polarized thinking and the mind reading and the catastrophizing everything and the overgeneralizing of everything and all these other things that people learn to do in their group, so that they learn to think in a very narrow on very narrow tram lines of how to get from thought A to thought B and not ever deviate and see the rest of the world. That's still all there.
Mm-hmm.
And they need to have that taken apart for them in a gentle sort of way that gives them the time to say, do I really believe that there is only those of us who are right and everybody else who is evil? Do I really believe that the only people who disagree with me are bad people, evil people,
Right.
deadly demons, as one
Right.
group member called me one time? Apparently, I'm a deadly demon. What can I say? But that kind of narrow tramline thinking, and then there is the purpose of, well, the problem of, if I don't have a special purpose to save the world, if I'm not a special person, what am I? I
That's right.
escaped being ordinary
That's right.
by joining the group.
Well, you know, you're
And now I've
actually
got to go back to being ordinary.
well, that's exactly right. And that is hard. That is
Yeah.
hard to do. I mean, we really should not underestimate these things. You know, we with some of these, we kind of pop these off a little lightly, but there's some deep wells. Getting over myself, you know, and I'll just keep putting this in terms of myself because I think it's easiest for me to talk about and relate to, perhaps for other people out there.
Sure.
And it's a great way for me to eat a little humble pie along the way, because I tell you, man, I was real full of myself when I got out of Scientology, and it's been a gradual process of making a lot of mistakes, and having to, and as a public figure, when you make mistakes in a public way, people are going to let you know about it, and that's okay. But sometimes it is difficult to hear when you are in a place where you think you can do no wrong. Your views are the best views. Your way is the, oh, hey, thanks, Philippization, for that. Yeah, absolutely. More cowbell. Excuse me. You know, when you're in this place where you have come from, and this is the thing, you know, this is it. It's almost it should almost be on Yanya's checklist almost of the characteristics of these groups, is this installed certainty. You know, this this deep level of surety that you are on the right path. You are on the golden path. You are on the path of enlightenment and truth. As Hubbard called it, the road to truth, right? And this road is rocky and it can be difficult, but you're on it. And because you're on it, and you know you're on it as a cult member, you're surrounded by truths. And you can align your life to these truths, and it's very simple and it's very easy, and the path is laid out for you very easily. That's the, you know, kind of one of the points of having a cult in the first place, is give people this very easy path to walk. When you take that away, you don't take away that surety. You don't take away that certainty right away. You still got a lot of that. And then when I, for myself, you know, started running into, oh yeah, I'm not all that. I don't know all that. I'm not so sure that I'm always right. Oh, I was wrong about that? What? That's impossible. There's no way I was wrong about that. Oh, I guess I was wrong about that, right? Like, you get hammered enough times about these things and you go, oh, and you start realizing you're not all that. You're just a fallible human being like everybody else. And there's one, recognition of that, two, acknowledgement of it, and then three, acknowledgement that it's okay. That it really is okay. It's not just, oh, it's okay, I'm just kind of a, you know, dorky person, or I'm a horrible person. And you want other people to go, no, you're good, you're great, everything you say is wonderful. You kind of want that a little bit for a while, but really, you know, no, it's not like that. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to make huge mistakes. And I did. I mean, look at the cult. Like obviously, I've made some big ass mistakes, right? So you have to kind of reconcile, and I think that's the difficult part. You know, there's the recognition, there's the acknowledgement, there's the acceptance, but then there's the reconciliation within your own headspace. How have you helped people with that?
It is so individual.
Where
Mainly,
do you begin?
Yeah. Well, the main first step is just get people talking about their experience, and making it okay for them to talk about how they're feeling about these things. And that just comes in the natural course of conversation. You're talking about something, and maybe you ask a certain question a certain way, and they suddenly realize, oh yeah, that's an issue. And you know, I've had people share their journals with me, or some people prefer to journal in poetry rather than in prose, and they'll read something, and there will be a little line in the poem that says, "I'm not special anymore," and that's a perfect opportunity to say, well, what does that mean to you exactly? How do you feel about that? How did that come about to you? What What's the background on that? And you get them to talk about it. And then they realize it's okay. We've all been there. You know, we've all, at least once in our lives, we've all been at the point of realizing, as you put it, I'm not all that, you know, and that's okay. It was in the group where you weren't allowed ever to fall short. Out here in the real world, falling short is how we learn. It's a part of natural human existence. And so, I'm not all that. I'm not special. I was a big fish in a little pond. Now I'm out in the big wide ocean, and I'm just a fish. And to be able to discuss that and to talk that through with somebody, maybe ask questions about what it was like when they first decided, or they were first told that they were somebody special. And it's not unusual in the recruitment process, which I guess as a you know, because of your experience, you wouldn't have experienced it in quite the same way as somebody who's just pulled in cold.
Yeah.
But a lot of groups, they will recruit with what came to be known back in the 1970s as love bombing, because the Unification Church actually, you know, used that process, and so did Children of God and several other groups.
Yeah.
This idea of sidling up to somebody and telling them how amazing they are and how wonderful they are, and how amazing it is that you came and joined us, and how spiritual you must be because you're here with us, and how this you are, and how all these people over here are just so keen to meet you and talk to you because you're just so amazing, and everything about you is so amazing and so wonderful. And how much of that can you hear before your head starts to get like this?
Well, it's funny because we sit here describing love bombing, and we've talked about it many times with you and other people I've had on, and it sounds so hyperbolic. It sounds so ridiculous. You hear about it, you just go, who would fall for that? You know, it's like, who would fall for flattery, right? But I'll tell you, when it's done right, it is powerful stuff. And it was done to me. This is how I got recruited to be on staff. They love bomb the hell out of me, right? And it was exactly like you just said. I mean, almost word for word, the things were being said to 17-year-old me by these, you know, grown-ass adult, college graduate, professional Scientologists, people I respected in my world. These were people who had status, and they were telling me how great I was. And it doesn't, and it didn't come across as fake or you know, condescending, or didn't come across as obsequious. It came across as very, very genuine. And I, of course, was in a place where I wanted to believe that, because there are very few things on this world more uncertain and more unsure of themselves than 17-year-old boys, right? And I was like, I was in a very, very like, will any girl ever like me?
The memory.
Yeah, I mean, how am I going to get along in life? And I just finished high school and I couldn't get laid, and now what? And you know, just all these like things, right? And here's this. You know, here are these people, these wonderful people that you respect, telling you how wonderful you are. And I think that actually this is really key to to understanding, but also to undoing that process, is because I think there's two things, for me at least, that have been really important milestones on this road to normal. And we'll get back to the normal thing in a second, but this business of being special. You know, it's really weird that both of these things are true at the same time. One, you are not special. There isn't really anything amazingly special about you. And two, you are a unique and special individual who is the only. You're the only you in this entire universe that we know of. There is nobody else anywhere else who is you, who has your viewpoint, who has your experience, who has your abilities, your perceptions, your ability to think through certain problems and things. That does make you special. But we define as cult members or ex-cult members, we define our specialness in terms of the cult. and the cult
Yeah.
paradigm, because that's how we were told we were special with the love bombing and everything. Like, I was only special not because I was this wonderful, amazing, incredible human being. I was only special because look what I could do for Scientology. Look what Scientology,
Exactly.
look what I was doing with Scientology, and look at how great I was because I was open to receiving Scientology. You're special because you're here, because you managed through circumstance, fate, kismet, whatever, to walk in the doors and be here. That's why you're special. So all the specialness is defined around the paradigm or the model of the cult itself, and that's what you have to kind of break the person of, and then I think they can get to a place where they recognize their specialness
Hmm.
because of their uniqueness in this big broad universe, and you can have that view, and it doesn't have to be this pessimistic, nihilistic, I suck, I'm nothing but a slug, you know. And
Or I'm nothing
you
but a
know,
slug without the group, without the
yes,
sect,
that's right,
without
that's right.
without the abusive relationship. Because that's the goal, that's the end point. You know, I've had people tell me, for example, I had one client tell me that they had been told by the leader that they were the first person the leader had ever met who was nearly as intelligent as he was.
Right.
What do you do with that? Well, you know, you're an 18-year-old person, and you are now told that within the first week of hanging around the group, that you are recognized by this super genius, so-called. You are now recognized by this super genius as being almost as intelligent as he is. Oh my goodness, what do you do with yourself?
That's right.
You know, now the fact is that as time evolved, this person came to realize that what the leader really meant was, you're going to be almost as good as at propagating the group to other people as I would be if I were to take the time to do that,
Right.
instead of having my minions do it. That was
Right.
the real message. But that wasn't the whole message given all at once. That was at the end of, the little dribs and drabs. You get the puzzle in a piece at a time, and you put it together. And the first bit you see when you put it together is, you're great. Then you see the word if. And then you see,
Exactly.
if you do what I tell you, the way I tell you, and you accomplish the results I want from you. And by that time, you've been sucked in, and your specialness is now redefined from, as you say, we are all special. We're unique. And that's perfectly true, unless you want to live in science fiction where there are all these other universes where you meet other versions of yourself. But let's put that aside and
Right.
let's live in the real world.
Exactly.
And in the real world, you're the only Chris Shelton here available. I'm the only me available, and we just have to deal with that and be the best we can be of ourselves, and that's enough. We are enough.
That's right. And I think this is actually really important as a point here, because it's, you got to, I think the differentiation or the progress that's made coming out of these groups. Oh, and by the way, thank you, Freddie, for that super chat. Appreciate that. The progress that's made is is for me, has been realizing that I need to take some of these if-then conditional statements off of my value assessments. If I'm a cult member, then I'm a special person. If I'm a Scientologist, then I am fill in the blank. No, just take all that away, right? You either are or aren't a smart person, a special person, a unique person, a wonderful, but you don't have to have these conditionals put on these things. You know what I mean? I don't mean this in a broad sense with every single characteristic of a person, but just in reevaluating the cult value set that was installed. That's where this removing some of this stuff becomes very, very handy and useful and practical,
And it's very important, because otherwise people stay stuck. Even if they don't realize it, they stay stuck in evaluating themselves by the system of values that they learned in the group.
That's right.
And they don't even realize they're doing it until you ask questions and get them talking. And, a simple question like, you've just told me that you think it's really important for you to do X. Why? Where did that come from?
Mhm. Mhm.
And, well, that's the way we did it. That's the way you did it where? Who's the we here? Oh, it's in the group. Why does the group value that? And then instead of just poo-pooing it, you sit down with that and you say, well, let's look at the value apart from the group. Is it still valuable? Because let's face it, if the group says don't go mass murdering children in school, it doesn't matter who says that. That's really a good idea, not to commit mass murder, you know.
Exactly.
It's not enough. We've got to be careful not to just say, well, the group said it, therefore it's wrong.
I think that's a
Even a
very
stop clock is
important.
right twice a day.
Yeah, no, I think that's very important.
And, you know,
Yeah.
but by discussing it, by looking at it and seeing around it, you can say, well, maybe the way the group applied that isn't very helpful to you. But maybe there's a core idea there that you want to take to yourself and say, well, that part is useful to me. And I can live with that. I can make that work in my life, and I want to. And it's only by that exploration, by that conversation, that you get there. But it isn't, you know, it isn't necessarily an easy conversation to have. And you don't
No.
have, my experience, you don't have it all in one go.
Right.
What tends to happen is you talk around it and then you slide off into something else. A bit like our conversations, you know, where you start talking about something and before you know it, you're talking about something else. But eventually you're going to get back there, maybe 2 or 3 sessions from now. And it is a bit like that, where suddenly something is said and it makes it all fall into place. And now they've got what they need to go away and say, let's see, who can I become in the world? Now that I don't have to obey the leader and be a part of the group, who can I become? Who do I want to be?
And
Maybe they never thought about that before because they were waiting to be told.
That's right. That's right. Or they had already decided what to be in the context of the cult world. I'm
Yes.
going to become a great Scientology auditor, and that's what I'm going to be, right? And you can definitely consume your life with that pursuit. There's a whole discipline to it, and there's all this, you know, stuff to read and lectures to listen
Mhm.
to and practice to do and people to counsel and audit and help and all of that. So you can have goals that are completely defined by the cult or the group or your membership in it, and then when you come out of it, you got to reassess that stuff. And I think for me, what we were just talking about in terms of the subject matters, for me, one of the best examples of that when in Scientology was the subject of psychiatry.
Yes.
Absolutely verboten in the world of Scientology. Absolutely horrible. They literally talk about annihilating it from the face of the planet. They hate psychiatry. So, of course, I come out of Scientology and I think to myself, well, psychiatry, it's horrible, it's awful, it's an atrocity, right? And I know my history of psychiatry. I actually, you know, at least from the Scientology point of view, I've studied about Bedlam and, you know, and Bellevue and the insane asylums and the torture and the you know, the transorbital leucotomies and lobotomies and all that stuff. Then you pendulum swing, then I pendulum swing over to the other side, right? Oh, well, what's good about this, right? And then, oh, well, there's this and this and this and this and this. Oh, okay, well, that's good. And then I realize after about a year or two, oh, wait a second, there's some stuff going on in psychiatry that isn't so great, that needs work, that needs to be changed, that needs reform. Now I sound like a Scientologist. Oh, I can't
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah.
And then having to again reconcile, no, wait a second, just because you know, the freedom to be critical or praise something is on me now, not defined by my former group allegiances or ideas,
Right.
and it's a freedom to come to that place, to realize that you can have your own independent point of view about a thing that may or
And
may not be informed by your previous belief set.
and you've just illustrated something without even, I think, without even intending to. You've illustrated that necessary movement away from polarized all or nothing kind of thinking, that
Yes.
black and white thinking.
Right.
Because to me, black and white thinking is a good candidate for the great granddaddy of all abusive, manipulative thinking and cognitive distortion in an abusive sect. Because so much else grows out of it. You start by getting people to realize there is good, and then there's everything else. There is us, and there is everyone else. There is our leader, and there is everyone else. I was just listening again to a broadcast last week of a book that was written about the Chinese Cultural Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't need religion, you don't need psychology, you don't need anything. It's just pure political dogma. And the idea that Mao Zedong could say and do no wrong, and therefore everything else had to be exterminated, and everyone else had to be punished. And the struggle sessions that people were put through, sometimes for a whole year at a time, to break them, to make them confess to the most ludicrous things, which isn't all that unusual. I mean, confession holding a pair of cans isn't significantly different from confession by being surrounded by people shouting at you and kicking you and telling you that you're a class enemy. There's lots of different ways of doing it, you know, and you do know. But that crushing down of all the complexity of life into two simple things. You've got the good guys and everybody else. You've got the good thing and everybody else. And then everything else gets crushed out of existence.
Exactly.
And that just gives birth to everything else. And you illustrated that when you were talking about psychiatry.
That's right.
And how you had to start making differentiation, that psychology, psychiatry isn't a thing. It's a complex thing with bits of it that are good and bits of it that aren't so good, and bits of it that should never have taken place. So that was an interesting kind of evolution you went through of thought.
No, it's true. And it's happened a number of times, right? Because it had to happen with my ideas about the LGBTQ community. It had, you know, about psychiatry, about drugs, illegal and legal, about medications, about medicine in general. I mean, there were a lot of attitudes about stuff. Study as well. You know, there's this very, very rigid system of study in Scientology, and, you know, trying to decide what's good and bad about that, and having to research that and research how schooling works and how education works. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff potentially here. And the more involved and the longer the person was involved in the group, the more there's going to be to undo. What do you have in mind when you're doing your work with people and in helping them to, you know, reacclimate to society and shed cult beliefs? How do you think of, you know, words like normal or average or returning to these states, right? What does that mean for you, and how do you communicate about that with people you work with?
Well, to be honest, I use normal as kind of clickbait.
Mm-hmm.
Because the older I get, the more I realize that normal isn't so clear cut as all that. So what I'm really thinking of is in terms of returning to yourself, finding out who you are and returning to that person. And I'll come back to that in a minute. I suppose what I'm really referring to is to becoming ordinary again and finding the value of being ordinary. That's a very strong element of what I'm aiming at when I'm working with clients, is for them to realize that being ordinary is not a dirty word, as it is certainly in certain groups. You know, realizing that it's okay to be a human being. I don't have to be homo novus. I don't have to be a second initiate of some obscure sect. I don't have to have all these special secrets. I don't have to have any Gnostic wisdom. I can be ordinary. I can like the smell of certain flowers and dislike the smell of certain other flowers. I can wear the colors I like and not the colors that are dictated by a leader who says, well, you are this spiritually evolved, so you should be wearing yellow, or you should be wearing blue, or you're so spiritually evolved, you should be wearing violet, or any of this nonsense.
Yeah.
I don't have to do any of that anymore. I don't have to wear my hair a certain way. I don't have to decorate my house in a certain way. I can be ordinary, which means I can be quirky in, not for the sake of quirkiness, but in terms of who I really am. You know, if I like E.E. Cummings poetry, I can listen to E.E. Cummings poetry if I want to. I don't have to have somebody tell me, well, that's not the right kind of poetry. Whatever it is.
I mean, I think you might be crossing a few lines there, but okay.
Well, so we won't talk about putting ketchup on ice cream then.
Exactly. Please, yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. How do you consult with people as to deep, reaching down into, who they are and their personality? How does this bubble to the surface, or how do you let it, or how does this work?
It all depends. Some people need encouragement.
Mm-hmm.
Most people just need space. They need the time and the appreciation that they can talk about things, and it's okay. I have no judgment about that. If you've got some dark secret love of the Spice Girls, I'm not going to point my finger at you and say, well, you got to quit that. I'm not going to do Bob Newhart's "Stop It."
You know about that. That's awesome.
Oh, absolutely. I grew up on Bob Newhart.
Yes.
Bob Newhart. I credit Bob Newhart with saving me from smoking.
Yeah.
All my friends smoked. Most of my family smoked. When I was a child, I heard Bob Newhart do his wonderful thing on Sir Walter Raleigh. I highly recommend it to anybody who hasn't heard it, because it is one of the funniest things on the internet. It's on YouTube, several versions of it. But also, as a child, it meant that when I reached the age of being able to sneak out for a smoke with my friends, I watched them put a cigarette in their mouths, and I just started laughing. And I just, to this day, smoking gives me this little tickle inside my head. That makes me want to laugh.
That is funny. Well, I am posting a link to that video you're referring to right now.
He saved my life. I could have been a smoker.
That definitely was a pretty good one there.
But being serious, to answer your question properly, what I try to do is raise certain questions that I know are there. They're going to be there, and I get people to talk about those issues. Very often, though, once we've been talking for a few sessions, they will raise things. And as they read material, I'll have people read a chapter. There are some two key chapters out of a book by Kaiser and Kaiser called The Anatomy of Illusion, which I still think is one of the most underrated books on the topic of control and manipulation. And I highly recommend it to anybody who can find a copy of it and can invest in it, because it's expensive now. It's out of print. But I'll have people read that. And as I said last time, I think, or the time before, I'll have people read Opening Minds. I have them listen to YouTube, like your channel and John's and some other people. And through the reading that people do, they come up with questions, or they come up with recognitions of themselves, and they want to talk about it. So a lot of times these subjects come up automatically. When they don't, there are certain things I do ask about. I do kind of ask, well, what was the key thing that you recall when you first joined the group, where you had to make a decision about how you behaved in order to fit in? Now, there are a lot of ways of asking that question, so it doesn't have to be formulaic. It wraps itself around what a person's told you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they've said to you, well, I went along to this meeting, and these people came over to me, and they all started talking to me, and they were all so excited about me being there, and so they'll go into what happened to them. And then it's very easy to go into that question further and say, well, how did you feel about that? Did it bother you? Did you feel comfortable? What kind of things did they say to you? When you went home that night or that afternoon, did you still think about that? And what were you thinking about it? And did it incline to make any particular decisions about whether to go back or not? And so on. You can just keep probing that and just get people to talk about that experience until they start seeing things that they hadn't noticed before, or start asking questions that maybe they want to discuss. And that goes all the way through their experience. You can talk about how they first decided, well, maybe I'm not comfortable in this group anymore. And again, that initial conversation can become several conversations which explore a lot of different things. And that will bring you to the realization, well, I never thought that when I left the group, I would just be out here in this ordinary world, this ordinary gray, drab, unexciting, uneventful world with nothing to look forward to. And now you can talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can talk about the fact, well, I spent 14 years in this group. How am I supposed to get an education? I went into the group. I could have gone to university for free. I've come out and I haven't got that money because the group bankrupted me. How do I get it? How do I finish my university education?
Mm-hmm.
How do I pay my bills off because they bankrupted me? How do I do all the things I need to do and wish I could have done because they bankrupted me? And because I don't have any confidence in myself, and because they told me that they didn't know how I would survive if I left the group. And all these things begin to come out, and then you can talk about them together. And then you can start unwinding the mess, the knot that they've made in that person's mind and in their heart. Because it is very much an emotional thing. It isn't just a set of ideas.
No, that's exactly right. And it sounds, it might sound a little complicated or difficult or something, but it's really not. I mean, this is a very organic process. It just kind of, a lot of this stuff just is coming out of you as you are examining or thinking about or looking at this stuff. I think a healthy degree of introspection is very necessary in coming out of these situations and looking at or trying to figure out where to go in life. I think you know, some people have a more of a knack at it, I guess, than other people do, or more of a willingness maybe to look at and examine their own thoughts and feelings and ideas about things. But I think it's an important part of the process to be willing to do that and to shed any sort of dangerous ideas or installed ideas, maybe even from the cult, that doing such things is dangerous or shouldn't be done, or you need guidance, or you need the spiritual guru's help in doing this, otherwise you'll falter or mess up or you'll screw yourself up. Or I mean, I know they kind of get a little wild sometimes in the way they will put these booby traps in place to prevent people from being able to do this kind of work. Have you run into things like that yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I quoted someone just a little while ago
Mhm.
who said to someone that came to me when they were leaving the group, he said to them, I don't know how you're going to survive when you're on the outside.
Mhm.
And I've come across other instances where, for example, somebody told me that when they were in a unification church meeting, and someone was speaking and told how someone who left the group then had an accident when they were just walking around in the city. They stepped off the curb to cross the street, and they were hit by a bus and killed.
Wow.
This person, the thing is that the way that must have been done, this person didn't go into the detail of how it was said to them, but the impact was so powerful that when they left, they got to the end of the street and they sat down on the curb. They refused to cross the street. The group actually was able to come and recover them the first time.
Wow.
Because they were afraid to cross the street, because
Yeah.
they had the image in their mind, I'm going to get hit by a bus, I'm going to die. And that's what'll happen to me if I leave, so I mustn't leave. And they just sat. They couldn't go back. They couldn't bring themselves to go back because they didn't want to, but they
Right.
couldn't bring themselves to get away and escape.
Yeah, it's a retention tactic that ends up having deep, you know,
Yeah.
that they'll stay with you for a long time. They're trying to keep you. They're trying to keep you from leaving, but
Yeah.
those thoughts can stick with you for a very, very long time. There, you know, years after I left Scientology, I remember having this bit of depressive episode and sitting on my couch thinking, I guess I am no good for anything than Burger King.
There it is. This idea that you will always be a failure unless you're in the sect.
That's right. And that came from Scientology. I didn't
Yeah.
make that up out of nowhere. They tell you that. They flat out
Yeah.
say, you leave the Sea Org, you're going to end up, you know, flipping burgers at Burger King. That's all you're going to be good for, you know, sort of thing. It's
The least they could have done was let you
crazy.
go to a place that serves really nice food, you know.
Right? I know, right? You know, Red Robin or something. No, it's bad. It's really quite bad. And I wanted to bring that up because I know those landmines can get in people's way. You know, here we're talking, it's not just this nice straight path to normalcy. And yet I want to really stress here, and I think it's time we definitely say this, that normal is a thing you can get to. Ordinary is a thing you can get back to after leaving one of these groups, even as a second gen member, thoroughly indoctrinated from childhood on. You can still overcome that. You can rewrite the neural pathways. You can learn new things. You can drop old habits. You can teach an old dog new tricks. You can do this, and I don't know that even that is said enough, forcefully enough. There is a normal life to be had beyond it, where you don't have to define yourself. And I think, when I talk about normal, a post cult experience is normal. What I mean is, you get to a place where you're no longer defining yourself or identifying as or thinking of yourself in terms of the cult and the cult's language and the cult experience. What do you think of that?
Absolutely. And I think that has to be the goal. And I think it becomes tricky because we all think we know what's normal. And when we're talking about a loved one, we all think we know what's normal for them. We forget that they are not the person they were when they went into the group. They're the person they are now, having gone in and come out.
Yep.
Or having been born in and come out to a completely new world that it's like seeing for the first time for someone who's been born in.
That's right.
Because they have no previous life to look back on and say, I wonder if I want to do that again. It's not there because they were born in. So, but the people who were recruited, they can't go back. It's, again, something I was watching recently was a documentary on people who were prisoners of war in World War II in Asia, in the Pacific.
They had it rough, man.
Like, in Malaysia.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that stood out, I thought I had heard everything before, but the thing that stood out for me was the woman that said that when she and her family escaped and got back to America, when they were liberated and got back to America, those that survived, people would ask them, what was it like for you to be prisoners of war to the Japanese in Malaysia, or where, and they might say a sentence or two to them, and these people would immediately go into, yeah, well, we had it bad here too. We had food rationing, and we couldn't buy nylons. And this woman said, at that point, you just realize there is no point in answering the question. There's no point in discussing it with them because they have no concept, and they maybe don't even want to know just how bad it was over there.
That's right.
And so there's no point in telling them. And for those people, for the family members, I can't tell you how many times family members have said, well, my son or daughter has come out of the group, or my husband or wife has come out of the group, and I was waiting for them to do such and such, and they don't. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe it was something they used to do before they went in, but sometimes it was that they were waiting for them to come out and be all hostile about the group, or be all angry, or be all something that they expected to be the normal response now that they've emerged. And the bottom line to this was always, I'm not sure they're really out yet.
Wow.
And having spent a lot of time talking to this relative, I knew they were out, but I also knew they needed that adjustment time. And so I had to say, well, you and I only know a little bit of what they have been through.
Right.
And you and I can only guess what they need now to make the adjustment to where they feel comfortable talking about it. And probably they want to know it's okay to talk, but they don't want to be questioned about it too much because that may not be comfortable for them. Just give them space and just keep loving them because that's what they need from you, and see what happens. And then I'll get a call maybe 2 or 3 weeks later saying, they're okay. They were out after all. They were just going through some stuff, and they said that maybe one day they'll talk about it and maybe they won't.
That's right.
And, you get through that. But normal, it's like we're talking about COVID and we're talking about having to adjust to a new normal. Normal for a person who has come out isn't the same as normal before they went in. And we have to accept that. And we have to not try to get them there. They won't go there. It's like asking them to regress in age and become a child again. No, that's not what we want. What we want is for them to heal
Well,
so that a
yeah.
person who, you look at somebody
Yeah.
like Viktor Frankl, for example.
Mhm.
There is no question that what he went through was horrible, because we know what those people went through. We know about it. We don't understand. We know about it. We know that they suffered and they witnessed suffering on a level that you and I will never, I hope, have to face. But look at how he came out. He didn't come out as somebody who'd never been in concentration camp. He came out as somebody who had come through concentration camp.
Well, exactly. That was the point I was
And
about to make.
that's my
right.
goal. That's my goal, is for the person to come out and, yeah, that's a part of me. That was an experience I had. I'm not going to pretend it was there, but I'm not living it in anymore either. I'm a member and an ex-member and a recoverer, and I'm now somebody that I have made myself.
Exactly. But
Oh.
exactly. And there are so many pitfalls here that people can make mistakes with or fall down on. And this is advice for family and friends now, more so than the actual cult member themselves. Is, this is why active listening is so much more important than you're talking. This is why we've talked so much about how to talk to somebody when they're in the cult, and how to help them, facilitate them leaving the cult. But even after they're gone, we have to stress, if you want to help this person through this experience, then that takes a lot of non-judgmental, non-conditional help. Excuse me, is you have to model the behavior, the good behavior, right? That the cult did not model. The cult was all about conditional love, conditional acceptance. You will only, we only want you here because you are a cult member, because you buy into this belief set, because you're pledging loyalty, because you pass the loyalty tests. And you have to be the opposite of all of that to help the person get out of that headspace, right? Because they are expecting that almost from you in some fashion or another. And when you feed that, you get what you water, right? This is what's going to grow, and you want independence to grow. You want, a direction of. I wanted to say this too. I wanted to see what you had to say thought about this. In alcoholism or drug addiction, there is this mantra of, well, I am an alcoholic, I will always be an alcoholic. I am a drug addict, I will always be a drug addict. I don't think that is a healthy way of thinking for ex-cult members. I don't think an ex-cult member should have the attitude, I am an ex-cult member, I will always be a cult member, I think you can move on from that headspace. I think you can move on from this idea that you're gullible, that you're susceptible to stupid ideas, that there's something wrong with you. I think that none of those things are true. I think that a person can be normal and ordinary and non-gullible and have a critical thinking regular life post-cult experience, and that doing so requires, exactly like you said, not going into denial about the experience, not making it that it never happened, but also not living in it for the rest of your life either. Recognizing that there's a point where you really can stop thinking about it and move on into creating a future rather than dwelling on a past. But now, having said all that, right? That's been my sort of thinking and goal thinking in this. But what's your experience with this?
I'm going to be annoying here and kind of tease some of that apart. And say that in some cases, that's absolutely true. But for some people, and this probably would take us off into the weeds here, as they say.
Well, what do you got?
Well, for some people who maybe are having some kind of an attachment problem in their lives, there's a susceptibility. See, one of the things that I think we have to pay attention to is that we all go into whatever we go into with our own susceptibilities based on our own previous experience. So two people could go into Scientology the same day, watch the same boring film, take the same test, get the same spiel, get signed up for the same courses, and have, for the next 10 years, have two totally different experiences of being Scientologists.
That's true.
Because what they brought into Scientology will be different. And I think if you have somebody who has an attachment disorder and who is still looking for, let's call it a parental figure, and they go into a group, and there is in so many of these groups the idea that the leader is some kind of parental substitute. Sun Myung Moon and his wife are true mother and true father, and Moses David was called dad, and you just go through these groups, and you have this. Sometimes it's not stated. Sometimes it's an implication that this person is like a parent, and the group is like your family. Well, if you haven't had a good family experience, that sounds awful good.
True that.
And you may look at the group and say, well, this group is not good. And you may leave that group, but that doesn't mean the longing for real connection to people is missing, that it's just been sucked out of you. And, once burned, twice careful, and you'll never fall for that again. It's like when somebody, if you remember your teenage years, you fall in love and you think you found the one, and then she dumps you, and I'll never fall in love again. I'm never going to be a sucker for anybody. Blah, blah. And 6 months later, you're sitting there in your math class or whatever, and you're looking at this girl, and you're thinking some other girl, and you're thinking, I'm asking her to the prom.
Oh yeah.
6 months ago you were saying never again, and now you're saying I'm asking her to the prom. We have, if we have a need, we keep having that need. And I think while there may be some people who go into the group and they become disillusioned with the group and they leave, and that's them, I think we have to allow for the fact that there are other people who have some kind of need to establish a real connection with an authority figure of some kind. Some kind of a leader, some kind of a role model, maybe. It doesn't even have to be a hero figure, but maybe a role model, something that they can look at and say, I need to be close to that person because it makes me better for being near them.
Right. How do we identify that sort of a disorder or situation versus a person who, would legit not have to feel afraid of or have concern about such things?
If I can get people talking about what was going on in here in the group, they usually begin to recognize this. It wasn't the group's promise that a flying saucer would scoop us up and take us to Venus. It was the leader. You should have heard him, or the leader. You should have heard her. She was really something special, and I just felt so much better around her. I felt like she understood me, even though we never spoke. She looked at me, and I knew she knew what I was thinking and feeling, and I knew she could help me. And now I'm looking for that person. I think I mentioned one of our last conversations, it must be the last one, the Rajneesh people who were in line to hear Guru Maharaj Ji speaking in 1990, 91, somewhere around there, when he was in London speaking. Prem Rawat Singh, was his name by then. And they had a living guru. And for these particular Rajneeshis, having the living guru was everything. Now the living guru was dead. And now here's this other person who's a kind of a living guru. And maybe he'll fill that need instead. Now, not the entire movement of Rajneesh followers came to hear him speak, but there were a lot of them in that queue to get in to hear him that night. Because those are the ones who they weren't looking just for enlightenment. They were looking for a master.
Okay.
They were looking for a spiritual master.
So you're talking about a sort of like a dependency. You're talking about like
it's a kind of a dependency.
Yeah.
In some cases, it's an addictive personality where it just happens that they found a guru before they took up gambling or
would
whatever,
you say that in your experience with this, is this been a minority or majority of people you've worked with who have had something like this going on? Because I see a multiplicity of personality types when I look across the spectrum of ex-members that I know, and I certainly see some of that, but I would not even call a majority of people that I know personality dependent. But I'm not sure how to diagnose that.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a majority. On the other hand, I have to say, I've never really sat down and tried to quantify it.
Yeah. I was just kind of wondering
For one thing,
because,
I'm busy. For another thing, um, it really doesn't matter the statistics. What matters is that the person sitting in front of me either is or is not looking for another master, another leader,
definitely. I was
or
just
that
I
they
was just
go into
trying
some
to
other addictive behavior.
no, understood completely. And it's a very, very valid concern. I wanted to bring that up because I want to make people understand that not all of you who are listening to this right now are going to fall into that bucket.
Exactly.
So this is something you want, if you're considering this, thinking about this, wondering about whether you have an addictive personality or this kind of person. This is where and why we talk about getting professional counseling,
Yeah.
so that you can be treated by a professional, and these sort of things can be sussed out. And these are important things to figure out about yourself, and in the
And
process of
the thing is, when a
this,
person
you
says to
know.
me that they're still looking for, because the other extreme, of course, you get somebody who will never trust anybody again
Right.
because they're now aversive to anyone teaching or leading or anything, um, because now they don't know who to trust. Therefore, they will trust no one, and
Right.
they're in that phase. Sometimes it's a long phase. Sometimes they get over it rather quickly. But when it's somebody who we talk it through and they begin to realize, gosh, the thing is that it isn't enough to just carry on doing this thing. Um, I really want that almighty, powerful, guru leader, tulku, whatever, to be telling me what's real and what's true, and reassuring me that I'm special, because the
Yeah.
specialness in that case comes from the person, not from the performance. Um,
Yeah.
when somebody's like that, it is possible to talk them through that and enable them to see. One of the things we tend to ignore is that we have a celebrity culture, and to some extent, human beings have always been like that. I think it's a side effect that we're social animals, and being social animals, we look for somebody to be a leader in that society. And there's something reassuring about knowing that somebody's taking responsibility for moving our clique in the right direction.
Well, exactly. And it's
And if that clique leader is dysfunctional or is narcissistic, then we're in trouble.
yeah,
But there's
exactly.
still that urge. That doesn't change the urge to have somebody take us somewhere.
None of us are living in a vacuum. I mean, it's impossible for us to
Right.
escape social hierarchies or groups or
No.
clubs or families or whatever word you want to use to describe this. We do none of us are living on an island or in a vacuum.
Mm.
How if there is a proclivity or a tendency or push within a person that they must be under a leader or something, then yeah, there's probably something to be dealt with there. But at the same time, let's not take a perfectly natural urge to be part of a group or part of a system or part of some social activity, and pathologize that, because there's nothing abnormal about that urge.
Absolutely not.
It's and the cult leaders, and the cult followers, we get the aberrant behavior because people will turn those dials up too high,
Mhm. Yeah.
on one end or the other. So it really requires a lot of deep looking and searching on this to see where you're at.
Yeah.
You
So
know.
much of this is solved along the way, though. In my experience, so much of it is solved along the way. For example, I know we've talked before about the role of boundaries,
Yes.
or what I like to call self-definition. Um, but boundaries is the trendy word, so we'll use
Right.
the trendy word now. Boundaries. Um, so often in the process of talking about boundaries, in fact, it's happening again now with several of my clients, but it happens regularly that we'll be talking. I mean, I have a sheet of paper here that I send out to people called Boundaries, organizing some thoughts, and it's just got 6 basic points on it that I ask everybody just to think about. Just think about those points, and what can you do with them? What do they mean to you? Because they're starter points. They're starter points, first of all, for the person's own thinking, because they've been in a situation where you're not allowed to have boundaries. So now you have to start thinking, what do I what do I even do with this idea? This idea that I can say no to somebody? Really?
Yep.
I can say, no, I don't want that, or no, I don't like that, or whatever.
It's a big
Um,
step. It's a big step
and
for
then they
some
come
people.
back and we talk about it. And we
Yep.
talk about it. Usually the conversation goes on and on and on in dribs and drabs with some major spikes as situations come up in their life. And maybe they discover that that they can say to the car repairman, well, no, I don't want that appointment. Think about that for a minute. To somebody who's never been in an abusive sect, it might be fairly obvious that somebody offers you an appointment and it's not convenient for you. So you say, no, I can't do that. How about such and such?
That's right. Or
Can't
how
do that
about,
at first.
or even when people are trying to force stuff on you.
Yeah,
I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to do that for you. I insist you do this. I insist you do that. And there is power in realizing that you're the one who gets to say yay or nay to those things.
exactly.
No, I
Exactly.
actually don't
And
need the help right now. Thank you. I'm okay.
yeah, yeah.
Even that.
And this is what I try to tell people. And that's what this sheet is about. It's just about asking people, think about these ideas. Think about what would happen if you tried to implement them in your life, and let's discuss them. Now, sometimes they go away and they read this thing, and then they say, I have a problem with this, or I like that, or could we talk about that? Sometimes it doesn't come up for several weeks, and then all of a sudden something will come up in their life, and maybe they've tried one of these things and it worked, and they're all excited that I tried this thing, and I thought they were going to be angry with me for doing it, and nobody was angry. They understood and they accommodated me.
Right.
And the realization that this light goes on, that it's okay to define yourself as different from what other people want you to be.
Exactly.
And you see, that brings up all these other subjects very often. It brings up the idea, well, if I can define myself, then maybe I can not have somebody else telling me who I am.
Right.
And it gives them permission to explore that idea. And then we'll start talking about that as well. So it's easy to make it sound like, and I don't mean this to happen, but it's easy to make it sound like there is a kind of a module here, kind of like going to university. You have a module and you start here and you go through this bit of the curriculum and you get to that bit of there and you take an exam. But in fact, what's happening is that the entire thing is interactive, and it allows me to keep throwing it back at the client and letting them see what they want and what they need, and then come back at me and say, well, we've been doing this, but what I really want to do is that. And then we do that because this is obviously not relevant.
Right.
And maybe we'll go back to this in 6 months' time or a week's time or whatever. But by making it that flexible, it means that they're putting all the ideas together into a whole. They don't have little boxes. Well, this is my box for boundaries, and this is my box for for whether I meditate or not, or this is my box for ringing people's doorbells, or how I dress, or what I eat.
Sure.
It all becomes a cohesive thing, and that cohesion is part of what heals a person. Because another part of the control within the group is to break you up and make little boxes out of how you live. So you have this set of rules for doing this, but yet when you're here, you have maybe contrary rules. Now, Scientology has a lot of contrary rules that they impose, but most groups do.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to teach you how to think for yourself. We're going to teach you to do what we tell you and to think the way we tell you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'll give you everything you want as long as you do everything I say.
Yeah.
Okay, let me ask you about another aspect that I think gets in the way of people returning to a state of normal or ordinary or moving on with their lives, so to speak. And that is the status that can sometimes in our modern society, especially on social media, there's a status that can be afforded to being a victim or being in our cases here, a former cult member. And there is a victimhood to being a former cult member. You were victimized. There is no question
Absolutely.
about it. I mean, it's not a matter of whether you were or weren't victimized by a cult leader. That's not the question, or even being brought into question when I bring this topic up. So let me just make
Right.
that super clear right from the get-go here, okay? I was victimized by Scientology. I victimized others using Scientology. I watched others victimize others with Scientology. I mean, it goes. I victimized myself with Scientology. It goes like in Scientology. They got all four flows. They got all the different ways this can happen, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not, so again, there's no denial of that here. But after you have come out of a cult situation and you are free and clear of it, there's no longer actually physically in your life anymore, and you are now in the status of being an ex-cult member. Very good thing. Good. Now we're going to work on moving forward and moving on with life. But there's this headspace you can get into where being and talking about and reliving and sharing with other people, for I'm talking about not just once or twice or three times. I'm talking about like you kind of make a profession out of it. And I know in bringing this up, I could have fingers pointed at me right now, which is why I'm bringing it up, because I don't think I fit in this category. But I do think there are some people in the X world, and I think this is a minority of people, but I do think this comes up.
Yeah.
Is anything I'm saying, is this Martian, or do you know what I'm talking about with this?
Well, I speak fluent Martian, so it's okay.
Okay, good.
But just call me Michael Valentine.
But do you think it could be, do you think that there are people who actually can be validated to the point where they don't want to give up the cult experience, or they don't want to move on from it because they seem to be getting something from it?
I think there is in some cases this problem. Again, there are a lot of different aspects to this. You ask some really interesting questions, Chris, because they are intricate and they do probe at the heart of some things. There are people who, and I want to avoid sticking blame anywhere, and yet there is responsibility that needs to be acknowledged. I think part of the problem has been that those of us who have been on the outside, and especially family groups and things like that, who are trying to understand what happened to my loved one, what is happening to my loved one now, if he's still in or if she's still in. It's possible, and I say this carefully, I hope, it's possible to want that newly emerged person who still is a victim, suffering the effects of victimhood, or has recently been suffering the effects of victimhood. It's possible to want them to explain so much that we lock them in to that position. One of the things people say to me very often is that for the first 6 months or so after they came out of their group, maybe the first year, maybe the first 2 years, it was really clear in their mind what had happened to them in the group. But gradually, that started to become less clear. The specific events started to become less clear. How they felt in those specific events became less clear, and that part of their lives became blurry. But if you're constantly recounting it to a group of people who are asking you questions because they want to know, is this happening to my son? Is this happening to my daughter? Is this happening to my spouse? And they're making you constantly relive it and relive it and relive it and relive it. I think it's not good for people, personally. I think it's far better to say to a newly emerged person, journal what you want to journal. Write down whatever you want to write down of what happened to you. And then let's move on so that you can move on. That'll still be there. If you ever want to publish a book, go ahead. If you ever need to use it in a legal case, you'll have a collection of descriptions that is closer to the actual events than your memory will be after a few years. But get it out of your system, put it down if that's what you really want to do. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. And then we move on, and then we progress, and then we look at recovery and healing and finding what happens after you leave that hurt behind. But if you're constantly being invited along to this group and that group, tell us your story, tell us your story, tell us your story, it's like you're having artificial flashbacks for yourself. You're creating artificial flashbacks where you are reliving the suffering. Now, for some people, that's just words, and that doesn't really happen to them. But for some reason, they do find the recounting of what happened to them very exhausting, even very painful.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we need to be a little bit more careful about that. The other aspect of that is that sometimes we create celebrity ex-members, people who are especially good at telling the story of their ex-memberhood. Mm-hmm. And we drag them around. It's not so much that they're victims, it's just that they're stuck in time because they've got to stay close enough to the events to be able to keep recounting them.
Right.
So now they're stuck in their celebrity status. It's like being a band with a great first album, and you're trying to write your second album, and everybody just wants you to do the old hits. And you want to move on and do your second album and your third and your fourth, and you're stuck just singing the same old hits. Right. Because that's what people want to hear. So I think that's another aspect of it. I think there are people who are traumatized by what they've had happen to them, and they're not ready to just pretend it didn't happen or just leave it behind as if it were just, some little thing that happened. No, they were really seriously harmed. And I have seen people whose trauma was so bad that their memory was affected permanently. There are whole areas of their life while they were in the group, it's gone to them. There are even, in one case, there was about a year or a year and a half of their life after they left the group. That's all fuzz. It's all haze. They have no clear memories of how they got through that first, I think it was 16 months actually. 15, 16, something like that. But for that person, they can't move on until they work through that. That's trauma. That is serious trauma. And there is no easy answer to that. So I think, again, it's one of these complicated things. Different people are in different situations. But I think on the whole, there is this problem that we can lock people into their suffering. I'd rather say it that way than say lock them into being a victim, because they were victims. There's no getting around that. But we're locking them into their suffering by not letting them say, right, now how do I heal from this? That's right. To me, it's like somebody cuts their arm and then we drag them out every couple of weeks and have them rip their arm open again so we can see them bleed.
Right.
Well, that may be crass.
I mean, it is a part of the looky-loo rubbernecking culture, and that's why I bring it up, right? Because I've experienced it. I mean, I've certainly experienced that with some people come to my channel, and they only want to hear about certain things, and they only want to hear about it over and over and over again, and and then they move on to somebody else who will give them that content. And we can, as former members who are trying to be activists, trying to tell our stories, trying to put the abusive warnings out there. It's like, hey, don't do this. This is bad stuff. You're out there trying to fight the good fight, and you can run into this and then, kind of fall prey to it almost in a way if you feel that, if chasing after that attention is more important than, can become more important or can seem more important in the moment than, than recovering and getting back to normal, getting back to a normal sort of existence. So I just want to bring that up because I see that happen from time to time.
I think you're on the money there. There is an issue there. Yeah. In the 70s and 80s, it had an even more a more seedy angle to it, and that is that some people were latched onto by certain newspapers, but newspapers in particular, in general, where they would just get them to write their story, and invariably the story would always be about the seediest side right. of whatever group it was,
Right.
And I've seen a reflection of this for the first time in the last couple of years, handling the NXIVM problem in the media, where it became all about the sex and all about the branding and all about the seedy, nasty, gross side of it. And I was really relieved to hear. I haven't seen it because I don't have that facility to see it, but I've heard that there is this new documentary called The Vow, is it?
Yep.
And apparently it takes the viewer beyond just, in other words, Nexium was more than just sex and sexual exploitation.
Exactly.
And I was so relieved to hear that, because every time I went to see what the media was reporting, it was about, somebody else being branded on their crotch.
That's right.
And I'm sorry, but if that's all Nexium was, Nexium would never have been a problem.
Exactly. And that's the thing. And that's the thing
that
they miss about this. Because it's the same thing with Scientology and Xenu, or the Going Clear documentary, and they, Debbie Cook was made to crawl on the floor and stand in a trash can and get yelled at. And yeah, those things happened. And yes, they should be talked about, but we dwell on them and miss the bigger picture of the massive amounts of thought reform and and coercive control that these people are being exerted on them. And we don't talk about that stuff, or the more boring normal aspects of it, because it's just not sexy or salacious enough for headlines. And that's what I'm talking about with these people who get stuck in this.
And because it's hard to understand.
Yes, it is.
Also because it's hard to understand.
That's right.
If you say this person was made to take their clothes off and was pinned down on a table and branded on their crotch, and while somebody else videoed it so that Renier could
and that
watch
becomes
it
this
on
idea of the cult experience, and you go, guys, that's about the 10th level of it. You got to get the first parts for that to make any sense at all.
I think the thing is that it's easy for people to grasp that that's harmful. Try to explain to the mass of people why the whole teaching about missed withholds is abusive.
Right.
It's deeply harmful. It is mind-wreckingly harmful.
That's right.
But how many people understand just how harmful that is?
Exactly.
And how would a media person explain that? How would you explain that in a newspaper article?
Exactly.
How would you explain the psychological damage in a TV show? And so it gets passed over.
That's right, because it doesn't sound sexy enough.
Xeno's child's play compared to something like that.
Exactly.
That wrecks your head.
Exactly.
So, I think there's a lot going on there, which makes it easy for people to get stuck in the way you're describing.
Well, of course, I recognize if it bleeds, it leads, and all that. I mean, we've been trained into this, this way of thinking about the media and stuff as well. So, it's it's sort of a little vicious cycle of how igniting our fight or flight and all that. But it's worth commenting on for sure, because it needs to be known that in this world you can get hung up on that. And it is a danger of the ex-cult world that you can get hung up on your story to the point that it is, as you've said, re-traumatizing, damaging, whatever. It's not good for you. And so I thought I should definitely make a footnote on that in the show here, because
I think it was a brilliant thing to talk about.
Yeah, I think it's
really
very important.
You did.
And with that, I think we're going to move toward wrapping up here. We just got this great comment from Susan here. She said, "I'm feeling better after focusing on this show. I'm okay, and what I feel is to be expected." Woo! And I agree. That is exactly why we wanted to do this show. Because I want people to know that, that the struggle is real. It can take time. It can be difficult. It can also be not difficult. It can also be easier than you expect. Everybody's different. Everybody's approaching this differently. Everybody's going to have different reactions, different things they're going to have to deal with and work through. And
it is possible to get help. You don't have to stay stuck.
Exactly. But the bottom line is all of us can get there, where we can kind of live a life where we don't have to be defined by the cult experience, and we don't have to be thinking about it all the time, and we can just kind of move on and create a better future for ourselves. And I would like to do anything I can, of course, to encourage that point of view and push people, down the road towards that. I think that would be I think that's a positive thing to be working on.
And it's what you're doing with your live feed and your videos, and so
it's what you do all the time. So yeah, exactly. Your experience may vary. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for your commentary while we were going along here, and also, of course, for those of you who threw some super chats my way, thank you very much. That support is definitely helpful. Really, very much so. So thank you for that. And Christian, I want to thank you for taking the time to do this with me and be live on the internet today. Not the easiest thing in the world to do. Always a little
It's
bit of
my
a risk.
pleasure.
But thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. And folks, I will be back tomorrow night. We will do our critical conversations right here, Melissa and I, and also for those of you keeping track, I'm starting school tomorrow. Tomorrow's induction day, so it's happening, guys. It's actually happening. The registration's complete, and so woo, this will be fun. All right, and with that, let's wrap it up. Boom, and boom.